First thing, there is a part of the storyline is about some Chinese activities oriented towards the Spratly Islands, the Paracel Islands, and coastal Vietnam. Out. The word China does not appear in the Vietnamese version of the book. When I say Vietnamese, it's in English, but available there. In the U.S. book, the protagonist, the hero, makes friends with a young lady, Vietnamese lady, who works for the American consul down there in Saigon. And also, he's a personal friend of the U.S. ambassador. Out. So why? That's very sensitive. So now she works for a legal firm in Saigon instead of for the U.S. consulate. Any mention of what happened after the war to people who either fought for the South Vietnamese Army or worked with our government agencies like the CIA, as you probably will recall, there was a reason that almost 1 million people, the boat people, left Vietnam. In large part, it was because of, first, the farms were collectivized, which wasn't supposed to happen. The South Vietnamese farmers thought they were supporting the Viet Cong because they were all going to become, their own landowners. And of course, that didn't happen. The land was collectivized, like Soviet Union had done, like China had done. Those people who were associated with the U.S. Were either executed or, depending upon their rank, went to, quote, re-education camps, basically concentration camps. And the length of time that they went pretty much depended upon what their rank was and who they knew. By the way, I didn't mention that, remember the Time magazine guy, Pham Swann? He was actually put in prison for 2 years because the North Vietnamese thought he was too close to the Americans, even though he had been a spy for the South Vietnamese. The Viet Cong, by the way, were always looked down upon by the North Vietnamese because a lot of Viet Cong were not really communists. They were just nationalists. And the last thing that the communists wanted when they came into the South was to have a competing party. And so a lot of the VC in the South also had hard times. Okay? They didn't get military pensions, for example. If they were wounded and disabled, that was kind of tough. Boat people, that was mentioned in the book about one of the characters and relatives who were part of the boat people. Out. No mention of anybody leaving Vietnam. The East Sea I already commented on. And part of the plot, besides part of the plot involving the offshore islands, the Paracels and the Spratlys, in the front of the U.S. book, I have a map so that people who read it can orient themselves as to what's going on and follow people as they go up and down Vietnam. In the Vietnamese version, the very last thing, and by the way, the last thing, they kept giving me little bits and changes. It was like the Chinese water torture. And then I'm leading up to, I'm already committed to do a book signing, and I'm getting little changes literally every week. The last thing they said was, the Paracel and the Spratly Islands belong to Vietnam. We want you to put some little dots in your map to represent them. And I guess that was my way of proving that those islands belong to Vietnam. Well, we're back to a geographic orientation. I think I've pretty much covered most of the history. And again, the areas that are of contention, primarily you got the Paracel Islands up here, you got the Spratly Islands down here. And the most recent thing I think I mentioned happened in March last month. Up in this area, we had a little altercation between the Philippine Navy and the South Vietnamese Navy. As recently as 1988, this is the Spratly Islands, way down here. You had an outpost, a military outpost of Vietnam. This is communist Vietnam. And we had an invasion of that from mainland China, where they killed some 70 Vietnamese citizens down there. That was 1988. So those kinds of feelings continue to this day. Whoops. I'm going too long, aren't I? Supposed to leave some time for Q&A. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to wind up right here. These two young ladies are, they work up at the Caravel Hotel. As you can imagine, they really like Americans. They really like Americans, especially the American dollar bills. But lurking in the background all the time is, this is the Ho Chi Minh Mausoleum up in Hanoi. And this is the square, by the way, where Ho Chi Minh read the Declaration of Independence back on September 2nd, 1945. So always lurking in the background, even though the Vietnamese, especially in the South, are very friendly to you. Everything there is a bargain, but lurking in the background is this feeling of, better be careful, you know, who you talk to and what you do, what you say, and what you write.
Any questions? We've got a few more minutes. Yes.
I just got a comment. When I was at a station in Binh Thuy, South Vietnam, and I remember talking to one of the mama signs there, and I said, "What are you going to do when we leave?" And she said, "Don't sweat, GI, someone else comes." I mean, they were in war constantly. Yeah. They knew no peace. And it was like, you know, a way of life there, and that was just, you know, sad.
Yeah, that is kind of a sad commentary. I should mention, for those of you who are interested, the most authoritative source of material on Ho Chi Minh is this book by William Diker. It's banned in Vietnam because in one place Diker talks about rumors that Ho Chi Minh had an illegitimate son by a Chinese woman, and that makes the book unacceptable in Vietnam.
Not perfect.
You have some books.
Oh yeah, that's right.
I personally, you know, just say I knew very little about the background and the history, but I found it such a good read. It really is. I would definitely recommend the book. It's easy. It's good reading. It's not necessarily easy reading. There's a lot in it, but it's extremely good. It's well written. And I don't get any percentage, so might take you up on that then. No, it's really, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I'm just curious if when you were in Vietnam, you were in the service, obviously. Yes. Did you ever see any USO shows while you were there?
Did I see any?
Yes.
I would call it a very small show. The first time I was there was an advisor. And these two TV ladies, and I don't even remember their name, they used to play in some weekly series, came down and put on a little variety kind of show, very small. I was out in the boondocks, so I never got to go see Bob Hope and Anne Margaret and those. The only thing we would see is the donut dollies. The donut dollies are the Red Cross girls. They would come in during the morning and, bring in coffee and donuts for the troops, and then they would go home before things got started at night again. So I would see them, but that was it. I never saw the show. You were in the show?
Yes, and we weren't in with Bob Hope.
Oh.
We were with a small group that we dropped us in the boonies on helicopter pads and all over because we didn't need electricity. But do you recall if these people were from Chicago or the Six Accolade show?
They were two young ladies. They were in a TV series. They both said, "Oh, come see me in Hollywood when you get back." And of course, I never did. But no, they were out of Hollywood because they were involved in a TV series. I don't remember their names now. Very delightful. See, I really admired the donut dollies and the people who gave up their time to go over there. And it's not, there was some risk to it. Helicopters have a habit of crashing occasionally.
You were going to comment on what's happening now in the South China Sea with respect to China and the rest of the...
Well, what's happened, it started actually most recently last summer. The Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, had their annual meeting in Hanoi. Hillary Clinton, as well as Secretary of Defense Gates, he went and met with his Vietnamese counterpart. Hillary Clinton met with the representatives of Singapore, Thailand, Malaysia, Brunei, the Philippines, Australia. I think South Korea might have been there too. And basically she said this. She said, you know, there's been some controversy going on about the islands here in the South China Sea. We, the United States, would like to serve as the mediator. The Chinese foreign minister went ballistic, and he said, United States, it was Clinton. That is not for you to decide. That is for us to decide, because the South China Sea, like Tibet and like Taiwan, are our core areas of interest. Now that's like saying, you better not step foot there. So you've got this. Then they kind of settled down for a while. They were all making these provocative armed movements back and forth. Lo and behold, last March, here's the Philippine Navy getting involved with what's going on. Now, I guess I should have mentioned this on the map. The reason the South China Sea and Vietnam especially are so important, all of the shipping traffic, the goods from Europe, from the Middle East, Japan, back and forth, the oil, where does it go through? The Strait of Malacca, next to Singapore, and then right up the coast through the South China Sea. So whoever controls the South China Sea, if there ever were hostilities there, obviously can control an awful lot. Think back to the Germans practically starving, you know, the UK out of existence by stopping all, you know, foodstuffs and raw materials coming in. So as the GDP of China has grown, the military of China naturally wants their piece of the pie. And so they are rapidly expanding their navy. Now, it used to be, remember, China was a continental landlocked power. They didn't need a navy. You know, they needed a few fishing boats. But now they're building submarine bases. They just commissioned an aircraft carrier that they bought from the Ukraine. Now, you don't need an aircraft carrier if you're going to be defending Shanghai.
That's my understanding, in China, the military actually owns industries.
Absolutely, yeah.
So it's a military-industrial complex,
Really?
far more integrated than our country.
Yeah, a lot of the Chinese soldiers work for those companies, which in turn are producing.
The generals, you mean, and the higher-ups.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, good point. Those companies, now, obviously China is, how many companies have you got listed on the New York Stock Exchange from China? Probably a good 50 or 60. But a lot of those major industries are still controlled, especially the defense industries, by the Chinese government, as are the state-owned companies in Vietnam. So yeah, they're capitalists, but the last thing they want to do is give up control. And if you totally privatize, you know, then you got shareholders telling you what to do instead of generals and admirals. Please.
You said you were an advisor. What was your role as an advisor and when were you there?
I went there in '65. I volunteered because in those days, the way you got promoted in brownie badges is you went to this little conflict before it ended, I thought. So I went over as an advisor. I was initially stationed down near Vung Tau. You know where that is. There's a big gambling resort when I moved there. Big. So I was an advisor to a training center, and that got boring, so then I volunteered to go over to the 7th Vietnamese Division and be an advisor to a battalion. And by the way, the guy that this book is all about initially was an advisor to the 7th ARVN Division down in Vito. It's a real eye-opener because he was very critical from the outset of the way the war was being fought. And he kept trying to tell everybody in Washington that, you know, we're going to lose this war unless we change our modus operandi. Of course, they didn't believe it.
Wasn't any money in it. There wasn't any money in it.
For whatever reason. Yeah, they just didn't. Oh, and then the second time I was a operations officer for U.S. units. S3.
Thanks. Any other questions?
Okay.
Listen,